It was a bright, sunny afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped lazily, and children played a few houses down. Everything seemed calm and ordinary, until the sound of shattering glass broke the peace. A dangerous gang had chosen this house, a seemingly vulnerable home, for their latest act of terror. They stormed in through the back door, kicking it open with brutal force. The family inside barely had time to react. The gang members were loud, threatening, and armed. One held a crowbar while another waved a knife, their eyes full of menace. "Where's the money? Where's the valuables?" one shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. The mother clutched the youngest child to her chest, while the teenage daughter backed into a corner, trembling. The father, trying to protect his family, stepped forward, his hands raised in a mix of defiance and fear. He swung at one of the intruders, hoping to buy a few seconds, but the gang was too strong. They shoved him against the wall and laughed cruelly, enjoying the power they wielded over this innocent household. The room was filled with tension, the kind that makes your chest tighten and your stomach churn. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, as if from nowhere, the front door opened. All eyes turned instinctively toward the sound. In walked a calm figure, his presence immediately commanding attention. Jeans, a simple jacket, and sunglasses, but there was something about the way he moved, quietly but confidently, that made everyone freeze. It was Steven Seagal. The gang froze mid-step. They had expected an easy target, a frightened family they could intimidate with no resistance. But this man was different. His calm demeanor, the faint hint of a smile, and the unshakable confidence radiating from him was unlike anything they had ever seen. The father and mother stared, barely believing their eyes. The children huddled closer to their parents, sensing that someone powerful had arrived. Steven didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply assessed the situation, every move deliberate, every glance sharp. The room seemed to shrink around him. His presence alone shifted the energy of the house, and even the gang felt it. For a moment, there was a tense silence, broken only by the quick, nervous breaths of the intruders. What happened next would change everything. The gang's arrogance would meet its match, and the family would witness something they could hardly imagine. In just a matter of seconds, the balance of power in the room would shift completely, and the suburban afternoon would become a scene no one would ever forget. The sun shone brightly over Maple Street, casting long shadows across the lawns of a quiet suburban neighborhood. The air was filled with the familiar sounds of afternoon life, the distant hum of lawnmowers, children laughing as they rode bikes down the sidewalk, and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. But inside one particular home, the calm of the day had been shattered by chaos. The family sat huddled together in the living room, their faces pale with fear. The father, mid-40s, had tried to confront the gang when they first entered, but he had been quickly overpowered. His hands were scraped, his shirt torn, and his chest heaved from the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The mother clutched their youngest child tightly, whispering soothing words even though her own hands trembled. The teenage daughter pressed herself into the corner, her eyes wide as she tried to make herself as small as possible. The older son had instinctively grabbed a baseball bat from the corner, but he knew it was no match for the menacing intruders who now roamed their living room like predators. The gang members moved with confidence, shouting threats and brandishing their weapons. "Hand over the money," one shouted, waving a crowbar. "Your stuff now," another demanded, knife glinting in the sunlight streaming through the windows. They laughed as the father tried to block one of their advances, mocking his feeble attempts to protect his family. The tension in the room was so thick you could almost feel it pressing down on everyone inside. Suddenly, the front door opened. The sound was subtle at first, a soft click against the otherwise tense silence, but it drew every eye in the room. A figure stepped inside, calm, composed, and unhurried. Jeans, an old jacket, and sunglasses. No weapons. No sirens. No dramatic entry. Just a man walking into a house that had just been taken over by chaos. It was Steven Seagal. Immediately, the energy in the room shifted. The gang's laughter faltered. Their confident steps slowed. They exchanged nervous glances, unsure of this new presence. For a brief moment, the air seemed to still, and even the children instinctively huddled closer to their parents, sensing that a powerful force had entered the house. Steven surveyed the scene without a single word. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room, assessing the situation with precision. The father's heart skipped a beat as he realized that help had arrived, but this was no ordinary help. There was a calm authority about the man, a silent assurance that the intruders were about to face someone far beyond their reckoning. The gang, however, remained oblivious to his presence. "Who's this old guy?" one of them sneered, trying to mask the growing unease in his voice. "Just some neighbor, probably." They chuckled nervously, waving their weapons and attempting to maintain dominance. Steven's gaze didn't waver. He didn't shout. He didn't demand they leave. Instead, he took a single, deliberate step forward. The sound of his movement seemed to echo in the room, commanding attention without raising a voice. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly, his voice steady, resonant, and unwavering. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The gang froze mid-motion, feeling the invisible power radiating from him. The mother and children held their breath. The father's grip on his bat slackened as he realized that this man was in complete control. The gang members shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. It was as if the room itself had changed, as if a new law had been silently declared. The intruders were no longer the ones in charge. Before we continue, I want you to pause for a moment. Comment below. What would you do if you were in this situation? Would you fight, run, or stay calm and hope for a miracle? I want to hear your answer. Steven's calm demeanor was not a bluff. His every movement, every look, was measured and deliberate. He wasn't just entering a home. He was taking control of a dangerous situation with nothing but presence, focus, and skill. The gang had no idea what was coming next, and the family could only watch, tense and helpless, as the calm before the storm settled over the room. This was not the kind of man you underestimate. And the gang was about to learn, in the most unforgettable way, that appearances can be deceiving. The sunny afternoon, which had started as peaceful and ordinary, had now become a stage for a showdown that no one inside, or outside, the house would ever forget. The gang thought they still had the upper hand. They had weapons, numbers, and the advantage of surprise. But there was something in the way Steven Seagal stood, calm, poised, unshakable, that made even the boldest thug hesitate. For a moment, the room was frozen, everyone waiting for the first move. One of the gang members, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, sneered. "Who do you think you are?" he spat, raising his crowbar. "You're just an old man trying to play hero." His voice was full of mockery, but it lacked conviction. He shifted his weight, ready to strike, but he could feel the change in the air, a weight pressing down that he didn't understand. Steven's gaze didn't flinch. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met the man's stare. "I don't play," he said quietly. The calm in his voice carried a warning louder than any shout. It wasn't the voice of someone afraid. It was the voice of someone who had seen danger countless times and walked through it without hesitation. Suddenly, the tall thug lunged forward, crowbar swinging. In a flash, Steven moved. He stepped aside with fluid precision, the man's momentum carrying him past him. The father's jaw dropped as he watched the scene unfold. Steven didn't hit with anger or panic. Every move was controlled, exact, and devastatingly effective. Another thug tried to sneak behind him, knife in hand. Steven spun smoothly, disarming the man with a single, effortless motion. The knife clattered to the floor. The intruder froze, wide-eyed, realizing he had just been outmaneuvered without even landing a touch. The family clung to each other in the corner, hearts racing. The mother whispered to the children, "Stay down, stay quiet." But their eyes could not look away. They were witnessing something extraordinary, the kind of skill they had only seen in movies. Except this was real, and it was happening in their own living room on a sunny afternoon. The gang scrambled to regroup. Panic flickered in their eyes. They had planned to intimidate, to take control, but they had not prepared for someone like Steven Seagal. The leader shouted commands, waving his arms. "Get him! Take him down!" But it was too late. One by one, the gang members were disarmed, blocked, or thrown off balance. Each strike Steven delivered was precise, calculated, and non-lethal, but effective enough to neutralize the threat. The father tried to intervene, feeling a mix of relief and awe. "Thank God he's here," he muttered. The older son, still gripping the baseball bat, watched Steven's every move, silently learning, mesmerized by the calm authority radiating from the man in front of him. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to highlight Steven's movements. Every punch, every block, every maneuver was clean, controlled, and unhurried. There was no panic, no wasted energy, just pure skill meeting raw aggression. The gang, once loud and threatening, were now stumbling, confused, and terrified. One of the younger members tried to run for the door, but Steven intercepted him effortlessly. A single, precise movement disarmed him and pinned him against the wall. The thug's eyes widened, realizing he had underestimated the man in front of him. The family could barely believe what they were seeing. The living room, once a place of fear, was now a stage for a masterclass in control and discipline. The gang's leader, breathless and desperate, dropped his crowbar. "Stop, please. We didn't know," he stammered. The words barely came out before Steven stepped toward him, calm, measured, and utterly untouchable. The once confident gang had realized a terrifying truth. They were outmatched, and their threats meant nothing in the presence of someone who truly knew how to handle danger. For the family, it was a lesson in disbelief and relief. For the gang, it was a lesson in humility and fear. The calm, controlled, almost effortless power of Steven Seagal had turned what could have been a tragedy into a moment of safety. The sunlight of that afternoon shone into the room, now a silent witness to the transformation. The gang no longer laughed. Their arrogance had been crushed. And in the center of it all, Steven Seagal remained poised, silent, and untouchable, a force the intruders would never forget. The gang had been humbled, but they were far from defeated. Panic coursed through their veins, yet desperation gave them a reckless courage. One of the younger thugs, a wiry man with a tattoo running down his neck, whispered to the others, "We can't just stand here. We need to fight back or we're finished." They exchanged quick, nervous glances. Their arrogance had crumbled, replaced by fear, but their pride still burned. They moved as one toward the family, hoping sheer numbers would overwhelm Steven Seagal. The father instinctively stepped forward, trying to protect his family, but Steven calmly raised a hand, signaling him to stay back. Every movement Seagal made was deliberate, precise, and measured. Steven's eyes scanned the room, calculating angles, distances, and the weight of each threat. The sunlight pouring in through the large living room windows reflected off the metal of their weapons, glinting like small warnings. The intruders lunged together, a chaotic mass of arms, legs, and fury, expecting to overpower the man they had underestimated. But Steven was ready. With the smoothness of a predator and the precision of a master, he sidestepped the first strike. The wiry thug's momentum carried him past Seagal, tripping over the corner of the coffee table. He crashed into the floor with a thud that echoed in the room. The father and children gasped, but there was no fear in Steven's stance, only calm authority. Another thug swung a metal pipe, aiming for Seagal's head. Steven pivoted, twisting the man's wrist effortlessly and redirecting the pipe to strike a wall. The clang of metal on plaster filled the air, startling everyone, including the gang. One by one, their attacks were intercepted, blocked, or redirected. Every movement Seagal made was efficient, controlled, and devastating in its simplicity. The mother pressed the youngest child to her chest, whispering reassurances she barely felt. The teenage daughter clutched the edge of the sofa, wide-eyed, as if watching a movie unfold in real time. Even the older son, gripping his baseball bat, froze in awe, unsure whether to fight or simply watch and learn. Steven moved like a shadow, appearing where he needed to be, neutralizing threats without breaking a sweat. The gang leader, seeing his men being incapacitated one by one, shouted in frustration, "Focus! Take him together! Don't let him!" But his words faltered as Seagal disarmed the wiry thug nearest to him. A swift twist of the arm and the knife skittered across the floor. Another thug tried to tackle him from behind, but Steven pivoted, sending the man crashing into the wall with a force that left him dazed. The family could hardly breathe. The suburban home, once a place of quiet and safety, had become a battleground. Yet Seagal moved through it all with the grace of someone who had done this countless times before. His strikes were precise, not brutal, aimed to disable without unnecessary harm. And in that efficiency, the gang realized how hopeless their situation truly was. The sunlight caught the dust in the air from overturned furniture, highlighting the chaos in a way that made it seem almost cinematic. The gang was disoriented, scrambling, shouting, and making mistakes. Their confidence had evaporated entirely, replaced by fear that was now tangible and heavy in the room. One of them, trembling, attempted to grab a vase as a weapon, only for Steven to intercept, sending the vase crashing harmlessly to the floor beside him. Finally, the leader made a desperate charge, a last-ditch attempt to regain control. Steven met him calmly, sidestepping, grabbing the man's wrist, and using his momentum to pin him against the wall. The leader's breath came in short, panicked gasps. The other gang members froze, watching in disbelief as their leader, once cocky and cruel, was now completely at their mercy. The family whispered amongst themselves, holding each other close. They could feel the shift in the room. The gang's power was gone, and it had been replaced by a force they had only ever heard about in legends. The sunlight, streaming through the windows, seemed to spotlight the scene as if the universe itself was bearing witness. Steven took a slow, deliberate step back, giving the gang just enough room to understand their position. "Enough," he said calmly, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made even the boldest thug freeze. "Leave this place, and do not return." The words were not a threat, they were a decree. The sunlight glinted off his sunglasses as the gang slowly, hesitantly, began to retreat, knowing that any further aggression would end badly. The family let out a collective sigh of relief. Their terror had ended, not with chaos, but with a masterful demonstration of calm, control, and unmatched skill. The afternoon sun continued to shine through the windows, casting long shadows across the now silent living room. And in that moment, one thing was clear. Steven Seagal was untouchable, and the suburban streets of Maple Street would never forget the power that had just protected them. The gang had retreated to the far corner of the living room, their faces pale and drawn. Their confidence, once so loud and aggressive, had dissolved into fear. They whispered to one another, trying to convince themselves it was just luck, that they had been outsmarted by a stranger. But deep down, each of them knew this was no ordinary man. Steven Seagal stood calmly in the center of the room, his posture relaxed, his hands at his sides. The sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted his every movement, casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to echo the tension still lingering in the air. For the family, the fear that had gripped them minutes ago was now replaced with disbelief and awe. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a quiet, calculated power that had turned a dangerous situation into safety without a single unnecessary blow. The gang leader, trembling and breathless, finally spoke. Who are you?" His voice cracked, betraying the panic he was trying to hide. "We've never seen anyone like this." He looked around at his men, all of whom were staring wide-eyed at Seagal, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Steven's eyes swept the room slowly, making sure every threat had been neutralized. Then he spoke, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the gang freeze instantly. "You've learned something today. But this isn't about me. It's about understanding the consequences of arrogance, violence, and disrespect." The room went silent. Even the faint hum of the neighborhood outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself was listening. The gang exchanged panicked glances, realizing that they had underestimated the man before them in every way possible. They had expected fear, hesitation, and weakness. Instead, they faced mastery, precision, and calm authority. Then came the moment of revelation. As Seagal adjusted his sunglasses, the afternoon sunlight reflected off the lenses, glinting in a way that drew the gang's eyes. You're Steven Seagal," the leader stammered, disbelief clear in his voice. The actor. The martial artist." Steven's lips curved into a faint, calm smile. "Yes, I am him. But today, it's not about movies or fame. Today, it's about protecting those who cannot protect themselves." His tone was quiet, yet it resonated with undeniable authority. The gang's jaws dropped in unison. The fear that had already settled in their chests now deepened into total awe and terror. The family watched in amazement. Their minds were racing. Not only had they been saved, but the man who saved them was someone they had only ever seen on screens. The teenage daughter whispered to her mother, "Mom, it's really him. He's really here." The mother nodded, unable to speak, her hands shaking as she held the youngest child close. The gang leader, now fully realizing the gravity of the situation, sank to his knees. "Please, forgive us. We didn't know who you were. We didn't know." His voice was almost inaudible, desperation seeping through every word. Steven looked at them, calm but firm. "Violence is a choice," he said. "Respect is a lesson. You had the choice to stop. You chose the wrong path." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Now leave, and never return." The gang scrambled to their feet and fled through the front door, stumbling over one another, terrified and humiliated. Each step echoed in the quiet suburban street as the family watched, still trying to process what had just occurred. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch, highlighting the surreal calm that had returned to the neighborhood. The father turned to Steven, gratitude written all over his face. "Thank you. I don't even know how to repay you," he said. His voice trembled, emotions raw after the terror they had endured. Steven shook his head gently. "You don't repay kindness with violence. Protect your family. Be aware. And remember, true strength is not just in skill, it's in calmness under pressure." Before he left, he turned to the camera, if only for a brief moment, or so it felt to the family, as if addressing everyone watching the story. "Here's the engagement moment. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, who is more dangerous, a group of desperate criminals, or one calm, skilled person? Would you want someone like me on your side, or against you?" The mother whispered, holding her children tightly. The father nodded in agreement, already understanding the lesson Steven had silently taught them. The sunlight continued to pour through the windows, warming the living room that had moments ago been a battlefield. And in that quiet aftermath, the power of presence, skill, and calm had left a mark on everyone, one that would never be forgotten. Steven Seagal walked toward the door, calm and composed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The family followed him with their eyes, still in awe, still trying to reconcile reality with what they had just witnessed. Outside, the gang had fled, humiliated and fearful, leaving behind the truth. Power is silent. Respect is earned. And one focused individual can change everything in a room, or a neighborhood, in just minutes. The afternoon continued, sunny and bright, but the neighborhood would never look the same again. Every glance toward that house carried the story of a quiet hero, a masterful presence who had turned fear into safety, chaos into calm, and ignorance into respect. After the gang had fled, a heavy silence settled over the suburban home. The once chaotic living room now seemed almost peaceful. The broken furniture, scattered objects, and overturned rugs bore silent witness to the violent intrusion that had occurred just moments ago. But the family felt safe now, utterly, completely safe, and all thanks to one man. Steven Seagal stood in the center of the room, calm and composed. He lowered his sunglasses and surveyed the family, his gaze steady but gentle. The father stepped forward, still shaking from adrenaline, and struggled to find words. I don't know how to thank you. You saved us. I thought we were done for." His voice cracked as he spoke, the fear of minutes ago still lingering like a shadow. Steven shook his head slowly, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "You did what any parent would do. You protected your family. I just helped tip the balance in your favor. Remember this, true strength isn't about fighting. It's about staying calm under pressure, making smart decisions, and knowing when to act." The father nodded, understanding dawning. He glanced at the older son, who had been watching Steven with awe, and then at the teenage daughter and the mother. The children were wide-eyed, still holding on to each other, but their fear had been replaced with admiration. The mother whispered, He's amazing. How did he do that?" Steven walked slowly toward the doorway, giving the family space but remaining in their view. "You all have learned a valuable lesson today," he said. "Violence is dangerous, yes. But fear is worse when it controls your actions. Don't let fear paralyze you. Protect your loved ones. Stay aware. Stay calm." The father took a deep breath and realized something profound. The chaos of the last hour had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been a lesson about control, courage, and respect. "We will remember that," he said softly. "Every day." Steven's gaze swept across the room one last time. He noticed the small acts of bravery, the older son holding the baseball bat even when he knew it wasn't enough, the teenage daughter standing her ground in the corner, the mother keeping her youngest child close without screaming, and the father attempting to protect his family even as he was overpowered. Those small, quiet acts mattered, and Steven acknowledged them silently with a nod. The family felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and relief. The air no longer carried the tension of fear, but rather the calm of understanding. They realized that what had happened was more than a physical rescue. It was a lesson in composure, presence, and courage under pressure. Steven turned toward the front door, ready to leave, but paused as the father stepped forward again. "Wait. Should we call the police? Should we report them?" he asked, still overwhelmed by the adrenaline and uncertainty. Steven shook his head. By the time the police arrive, the lesson will already have been learned. The gang knows now that violence has consequences. They will think twice before ever targeting a home like this again. His words were measured, precise, and carried the weight of experience. He wanted the family to understand that protection wasn't just about weapons or brute strength. It was about presence, skill, and timing. As Steven opened the front door, the afternoon sun illuminated him, casting long shadows that seemed almost cinematic. The neighborhood, once peaceful, had been witness to an extraordinary event. The father, mother, and children followed his gaze, absorbing the sight of a man who had changed the course of their afternoon with nothing but skill, calm, and authority. The father stepped closer, his voice firm now, steady. "Sir, I don't even know your name, but you've changed our lives today." "Thank you." Steven nodded slightly, offering a small, calm smile. "You've learned what matters most," he said. "Stay safe, stay aware, and respect life, all lives, not just your own. That is the true lesson here." Before stepping outside, he looked back one last time at the family. "Remember this feeling," he said softly. "The calm that comes after fear is your strength. Protect it, cherish it, and use it wisely." The father, holding his family close, watched Steven leave. The children waved, still wide-eyed, and the mother whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. The air was filled with a sense of relief and gratitude that could almost be felt physically. As the front door closed, the family turned to each other, their bond strengthened not just by surviving the attack, but by witnessing a masterful display of calm, skill, and authority. The sunlight continued to pour into the living room, shining on broken furniture, scattered objects, and the remnants of fear, now transformed into understanding, respect, and the knowledge that true strength is quiet, measured, and deliberate. In that moment, the family knew they had not just survived. They had learned something far greater. They had learned the value of composure, courage, and respect. And the presence of one calm, untouchable man had ensured they would never forget it. The sun continued to shine over Maple Street, golden and warm, as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet, for the family in the suburban home, the events of the afternoon had left an indelible mark. The broken furniture, the overturned rugs, and the scattered belongings were not just evidence of a violent intrusion. They were reminders of a lesson far greater than fear or chaos. Steven Seagal had left the house, but his presence lingered like a shadow of calm authority. The father glanced around the living room, seeing the remnants of the gang's arrogance in every corner. He noticed the dents in the furniture where the thugs had stumbled, the marks on the walls from the chaos, and the broken window that had allowed the danger to enter. Yet, amid the destruction, he saw something else: the resilience of his family and the proof that courage can emerge even in the most terrifying situations. The mother knelt on the floor, holding the youngest child, whispering reassurances that she had barely felt herself until now. The teenage daughter cleaned a few small broken objects from the floor, her hands shaking, while the older son carried the baseball bat back to the corner where it belonged. They had survived, yes, but they had survived in a way that taught them more than just the reality of violence. They had witnessed control, mastery, and respect embodied in one quiet, unstoppable man. Steven's words from moments ago echoed in their minds. Violence is dangerous, yes. But fear is worse when it controls your actions. True strength isn't measured in weapons or numbers. It's measured in calmness, awareness, and the ability to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The father repeated the words quietly, letting them sink in. They were simple, yet profound. Outside, the neighborhood seemed unchanged. Children still played, neighbors chatted on their lawns, and the sunlight reflected off the windows of houses down the street. To anyone watching from the outside, it had been an ordinary afternoon. But inside that home, lives had been transformed. The family had been reminded that respect, courage, and composure are the true markers of strength. The father gathered his family together, holding them close. "We were lucky," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But it wasn't luck alone. It was presence, it was skill, it was calm. That's what kept us safe. That's the lesson we need to carry forward." The mother nodded in agreement, hugging her children tightly. Even the teenage daughter, who had spent most of the chaos frozen with fear, now understood that courage often comes from restraint, not aggression. As the family reflected, the father felt compelled to share what they had learned with others. He looked out the window at the bright afternoon and thought about the people in their community, the families that might one day face danger. What would they do if confronted with fear? Could they stay calm? Could they act with precision and courage instead of panic? Steven Seagal had shown them that it was possible. Not through rage, not through brute force, but through awareness, discipline, and focus. True power, they realized, is silent. True respect is earned, not demanded. And true courage comes when you act with clarity, even when chaos surrounds you. The father turned to the camera, as if speaking directly to the audience watching this story unfold. "We want to thank everyone watching," he said. "This isn't just our story. It's a reminder for all of us to stay aware, to stay calm, and to respect every life. You never know who might be in the room, and you never know what quiet strength might be standing by to protect you. Now comes your moment. I want you to pause and reflect. Comment below. What would you do if you were in this situation? Would you freeze, fight, or stay calm like the man who saved us? Share your thoughts. I want to see how many of you understand that calm is stronger than chaos." The mother whispered to her children, "Remember this day. Remember what courage looks like. Not just strength with hands, but strength with heart and mind." The older son nodded, placing the baseball bat back in its place, realizing that sometimes the most powerful action is knowing when not to act rashly. And as for Steven Seagal, he walked away into the suburban streets, calm, composed, untouchable. He left behind a family safe, a neighborhood forever aware, and a lesson far louder than any lecture could ever be: respect everyone, even when no one is watching. Respect isn't for the powerful, it's for the humble, the observant, the disciplined. The sunlight filtered through the leaves of the street, casting shadows across the sidewalk as if nature itself had paused to acknowledge the lesson. The broken door, the overturned furniture, the echoes of fear, all reminders that danger can strike at any time, but calm, focus, and respect can protect against even the most chaotic threats. Before we close this story, I want you to take a moment to honor humility and composure. Type respect in the comments if you believe true strength comes from calm, not chaos. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to acknowledge every one of you who values courage and integrity in your own life. Because in the end, it's not the violence we remember. It's the presence of someone who can transform fear into safety. It's the lesson that one calm, focused, and untouchable person can change everything in a room, in a neighborhood, even in the lives of everyone watching. The family stepped outside into the warm sunlight, still processing the events. For them, the world felt different now, not more dangerous, but more hopeful. They had witnessed the power of calm, the strength of discipline, and the necessity of respect. And as they looked down the street, they knew that the lesson would stay with them forever. The sun set gently, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban homes, leaving behind a story of courage, humility, and the untouchable strength of one man who reminded everyone that real power is silent, respect is earned, and fear can always be met with calm.